Welcome once again to Clash Course. That was Greg Bray. I'm sorry you had to look at that for so long. Hello, Greg. How are you doing?
Wonderful. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing fine. I understand you've been in your room crying for the past 2 weeks.
Yes, yes. Well, it was a pilgrimage
A
to
pilgrimage
my
of
room to
tears.
cry.
A
Right.
pilgrimage of tears.
It was
Just like,
really trying to find myself, and when I did, it was not pretty. So, you got to take the good with the bad, I guess.
okay. You take them both, and there you have the facts of life, is what I heard.
Ah, I don't even know where to go with that one.
Okay. Well, you don't have to go anywhere. How was your vacation?
It was wonderful. It was actually one of the highlights of it was, of course, the wedding ceremony itself when my wife's sister got married. And what I thought was fantastic about it was they didn't have the opportunity to write the ceremony or meet with the officiant for it until about 15 minutes beforehand. So they had their readings and they'd given sort of the general structure, but there was no discussion with the officiant. Now, my sister-in-law's new husband is a very um, firm atheist, and it was not by any means a secular ceremony because it was done by a minister who had no idea that he was an atheist. But what was great was the reading that he chose was it was a classic, and I think it's great because the discussion that we're going to have is, you know, timely at least. But it was Plato from the Plato's Symposium talking about what love is, and it was fantastic. It was the most inclusive wedding reading I've ever heard in my life. It very explicitly talks about I don't remember exactly how it stated, but the men,
You don't have the quote in
the
front
people
of
who
you?
came from the men are the men who love men, and yeah,
You
it
don't
was
have you
great.
don't have the quote in front of you?
I have not had the chance to pull it up. I was just about to do that, but
Oh, well, nice start to your return to Shotem. Uh, anyways, do you have do you have the Epicurean? Ep,
that I
what's the name?
do.
Epicurean?
Yes.
What is it?
All right. That quote, the discussion for today
What's the guy's name?
is his name is Epicurus or Epicurus is how it's spelled
Epicurus.
in this one. Um, I've always seen it with an I there. I think it's transliterated to an extent. So, um, the quote is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? So this was from 33 AD, right about the same time the crucifixion is posited as having happened.
I bet Jesus was furious
You're probably right. He
when he saw
This is
that in the
probably
newspapers.
why he actually came back. It had nothing to do with the prophecies. You see, what happened is they killed him. He went there. He said, "Oh no, he didn't," and he came
Aw,
back
snap! Aw,
to put
aw,
Epicurus in his
snap!
place.
Sons of God, burn! Oh, burn in hell!
So we didn't actually discuss who's taking the con position on this one at all.
Oh,
Do you disagree with this statement? Is it something that I need to disagree with?
you're taking the con position.
All right, I'm happy to do.
I saw you bracing yourself.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, okay. No, I'll take the con position. That's what I prepared myself for.
All right, that's what I'd assumed, but I was like, that would be just like Joey to throw that one at me there. That like, hey, let's talk about this because I'm assuming
You're like,
that you agree
I'm
with
not
it,
gonna
and I'm
be
going
a,
to say at the
I'm
end,
gonna man
I.
up. I have no idea what I'm gonna say, but okay, here we go.
That's called integrity right there.
All right, I lose.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I actually, yeah. Okay. So,
So let me just state up front that that I, if I perceive correctly who he is arguing with, um, I don't agree with that group of people. If he's arguing with those who at that time believed in a single God, that I don't think that there were too many, were there? In his culture? I'm asking you. I would think
I
that he's either addressing Judaism or
I'd
possibly
imagine so.
um,
I'm really not that.
I don't know. I don't know that for sure. But if he's addressing Judaism, or I don't think he's addressing Christianity, but if he were,
Right. Well,
or
at that time, Christianity would have been called um, Judaism as well. That was
right,
before it was a different. So yes, he very certainly was.
yeah. So I mean I don't agree with the I don't believe in the God that he's trying to disprove, but I don't think that he's successfully disproving that God. He's creating a framework of logic. He's taking a hypothetical God, and he is trying to show that God is a logical contradiction, right?
Right, and I think that this quote very specifically sort of requires the traditional concepts of an anthropomorphic God. Of course, without that, an anthropomorphic or interventionist God that has,
And then
um,
I would agree interventionist. I don't know that I would agree anthropomorphic, but perhaps I'm
well, I
misunderstanding how
think
you're
at
using
least
the term.
to some degree, not necessarily, corporeal and has a body and chucks lightning bolts or whatever, but something that at least thinks in a way related or that we can relate to, that
Right.
it has some sort of thought process that
So,
not
so
just sort
I
of force.
genuinely disagree that this statement is logically true. That it is a box that cannot be escaped from.
Okay, I'd like to understand how.
Okay. All right. So read the first line.
It says, "Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then He is not omnipotent."
By definition, that would have to be true. I agree with
Correct.
that. All right. So we'll just throw that one aside. Read the next line.
Is He able but not willing? Then He is malevolent.
Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. I disagree with that. Read the next line.
Is He both able and willing? Whence cometh evil?
Um, I disagree with that. Go ahead. And the last line.
Is He neither able nor willing? Then why call Him God?
Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? I kind of disagree with that, but not so much. All right, so let's
I
back.
agree with that one pretty strongly.
You you strongly agree with that. Well,
Yeah, the idea
so
of if something is neither
the theism coming out at you, coming out
right
at you.
able to do this or
Yeah. Well, I mean, the term
what's the
God is
point?
used in thousands of ways to I mean, he is defining a God. He is defining any God in this statement, unless he's addressing a specific God, as being omnipotent and all loving. But there have been plenty
Well,
of
I
gods
think
who
that
are
we can
evil.
derive from the statement, though, that he's obviously in this statement referring to a singular God.
Yes.
So if it's not the Hebrew God, it would have to at least be the chief God or the all powerful God. In
Yeah.
fact, when he very explicitly criticizes him being or not omnipotent, would of course reveal that the audience he's speaking to assumes that God is
Right.
omnipotent. So the God that
And
he's
so
criticizing would be by,
right.
I mean,
So you have to deduce what he means when he uses that term. But he lives in a culture where there are lots of gods who are, and among them are evil gods and gods who are not completely powerful. But yes, we must deduce that he's talking to people who believe in a God who is all powerful and apparently all good. Right.
right.
Okay. So we'll
Yep.
we'll go from that assumption, and we'll just
And I'm actually going to admit my ignorance here a little bit with the term malevolent. I can use it, but I really cannot tell you exactly what that means. So I've got to look up the definition to even
malevolent.
understand.
It just
Yeah,
means
it
means
means
mean.
it's that it see because that's the thing is malevolent seems like it. I that's the only hitching point in this one that I think that you and I might be able to agree upon is his use of malevolent there. Just because he's not willing to prevent evil is, I mean, that's a debatable point. I think, depending on
Absolutely.
how you mean
Absolutely.
malevolent.
I've heard uh, um, uh, atheists time and time again make a similar argument, and I'm absolutely sick of them, to be honest. Um, but the argument that was a joke. Gosh, if you don't laugh at my racist jokes,
I,
I look like a
I
jerk.
thought for a moment that you meant the arguments is what you're sick of.
No,
That argument being used. I'm like, yeah, I
yeah,
get. Oh, you meant atheists, but then by then it was too funny, and I looked. Or, I mean, it was too late to let it look funny, and because then I would have looked like the guy who just didn't get the joke for too long, which was accurate.
no.
But
I
um,
trust you as my atheist friend to catch me when I start leaning back. So, anyways,
it's harder to do this when I'm only listening, and I'm listening through my right ear, and according to some pseudoscience, that means that I'm only using the logical part of my brain.
okay. Um, so that was me not catching you. Um, so the argument that I hear that I've heard from several of my atheist friends is similar to this one, and that is, if there is a God, then why evil? Why is all this happening in this world? Okay, and at this, at the time that I heard it and wrestled with it, I really believed in a semi-biblical God who, was Jesus in the flesh and was all loving. He wasn't the Old Testament God. Um, and and so I defended that God. Um, and
Well,
I,
and I think it is worth saying in context here. At the time this was written,
yeah,
the Old Testament was the only scripture that existed. I mean, I'm sure there were other scriptures that
yes,
just never made the
yes,
canon, but the New Testament had not yet been written.
but I think it's worth agreeing on this point that you and I are reading this as addressing a modern God, the God of the Christians. So I,
Right,
so I
or
know
at
I
least
know
a very common concept
one
of that,
one
of
thing we
course.
don't know is what Epicurus meant. We don't know for sure, but we do know that when most people present this argument, they are they are arguing against either the God who is represented by both Old Testament and New Testament, or by the God who is represented only by the New Testament. One or
Right.
the other. And so I'm coming from it from that standpoint now. Okay,
Okay.
I changed.
Okay.
All right. Um, so the second line says, if God is um, all, if he is
It says, "Is he able but not
not
willing?
willing, then he
Then
is
he is
malevolent.
malevolent."
Okay. So um, that's where my biggest sticking point is, to be honest. Even if God is all loving, I have no problem with that being the case, that he is able and not willing, because we live in a complicated world. We don't live in a world where everybody's a robot and everybody's a puppet. If God created a bunch of puppets who had no life or will of their own, then what would he be? And if they had no choice, wouldn't that be the only way to prevent evil completely?
I would have to disagree. I'd have to say that there, again, if we're talking about something that's all powerful, there's certainly other options to prevent evil. Specifically, again, this is a God that is very commonly believed to intervene. As we discussed, it has to be an interventionist God,
Right,
and is obviously capable of intervening,
right.
as that's given in the statement, and could therefore do so in any number of ways. And I think we also need to recognize that evil itself is a term that is flexible and could be unreasonably broad, to say that, well, I shouldn't have stubbed my toe this morning if God
No,
was watching
those
out.
things
But
which hurt other, our ability to hurt each other specifically.
right, and I think that even that, there's a difference between harmful and what I think, at least, the argument actually really covers as evil. I mean, acts like getting mad at my brother when I was a kid and punching him. It was harmful. It was bad for me to do, but it was also a learning experience and things for me to grow from in that way. And things that that can, I mean, there was not any permanent harm done in this situation. However, if I get mad at Casey and I punch him in the mouth, he's 2.5. That is something I would
That
consider
was
to be
that was
evil.
terrible. That was horrible.
I I really should stop, but that's that's something that I would consider to be an evil action. That is extremely harmful. It is an act of malevolence
See, I see
in that
them.
respect.
I see them. I see what you're saying, but I also see them in as categorically the same, because just because you're a child and your fists aren't as heavy, doesn't mean it didn't come from the same place. Whenever we act out of violence, I'm going to make a hasty statement here, but I think it's right that that it is almost always out of immaturity and impatience.
I don't think I'm gonna pick that battle specifically. There could be other things we could go for, but that's worth a worthy enough
Um,
understanding for me. What I'll say though is that I think that when we're discussing evil, intention is certainly important. Of course, it's not evil for a meteor to strike a building and kill a bunch of people. It is evil to fly an airplane into that building on purpose and do the same thing. So that's intent is obviously important, and as I think you covered, an act of harm to one human by another is sort of one of the big hitching points there as well. But
yeah.
there's also the degree of harm, the permanence of the harm, and um, the consequences of that harm that I think really sort of and it'd be difficult to define exactly at which point this happens, but I think that there is a threshold at which something goes from bad or harmful to really just evil. And I think that there's also,
So if a man swings a sword and chops another man's head off, and another man takes the same swing, but the man he's swinging at dodges it, one is bad and the other one is evil.
I think even that we need to consider a little bit more context and why they're swinging swords at each other. And they could be soldiers that have been forced into this. They could be, but yeah, I mean, if somebody does this out of what the common terminology is cold blood, if they just hunt somebody down and try to kill that person,
Yeah.
and whether they succeed or fail, the intention there, I think, is sufficiently malevolent to count
Yeah.
as evil.
See,
So there's
I
again
used to
multiple scales, and it's sort
I,
of.
I used to believe in evil when I was a Christian. I believed that there was the Holy Spirit or Hosper the friendly ghost, as Matt and I have started calling him. Pretty funny, huh? Yeah, that was a team effort on that part. We're pretty proud of
I
it.
like that one.
Yeah, and he came into you, and if Hosper came into you, you were good, and if he didn't, then you were depraved and evil, and somehow these were, there was some mystery about what these things were. But when you step back away from it and you subtract all these works of fiction, I think that what you come up with is that most of the time, when somebody does something that somebody else perceives as evil, the person who did the act either considers themselves good, right, or justified most of the time.
I certainly agree. I really cannot argue. I don't think that there's really, I mean, aside from sociopaths or people that simply
Right.
are incapable of empathy, I don't think there's any actions that people take that are not either a, not considered.
Yeah.
I do certainly believe as well that there's things that people simply don't think about what they're doing, or are incapable of thinking about it, say if they're
Yeah.
under the influence of some sort of chemical. But there's, other than that, yeah, there are certainly not any actions that I'd even go so far as to say that, Mao Zedong and, Hitler thought
Yeah.
that they were
Absolutely.
doing good at the time, or
They
at least
they
justified.
did.
They thought it was what's best for
You
the
know,
world and humans, and that doesn't make
Hitler
them
was very
not.
excited about creating a brave new world full of white people.
Hmm.
Uh, and it was sick But I would argue that in all cases, whether you're a sociopath or not, whether it be the Christian Crusades or the Muslims jihad or a kid throwing a rock at another kid or a sociopath murdering a bunch of people, that we're always dealing with some sort of immaturity of the mind. We're not dealing with, even in the case of a sociopath, we're not dealing with somebody who is just evil incarnate. I certainly, when you look at it and you allow your emotions to hit you, when you experience these things or you hear about them, that sometimes you can feel like I'm just looking at sheer evil incarnate. But when it comes right down to it, we're not talking about some sort of magical force. We're talking about people whose brains are not fully developed in some way or another, whether it be a mental illness or an immaturity. It's always an underdeveloped part of your mind, right?
I do agree, and I'll say, or at least to a large extent, I agree. But I will say that specifically for things like um, the sociopaths, there is amorality. I mean, they are amoral.
Sure.
Not immoral. They're simply not. Morality is not a consideration that they take into account. It's a
Whatever it is about
justification
most of our
by
brains,
logic and pure logic.
whatever it is about most of our brains that practices what we call morality is underdeveloped in them.
Right. But I did want to make the distinction here to actually harken back to our several week discussion about polygamy or monogamy. We sort of had a point of revelation when we recognized, or I think it was me recognizing that you were using completely different understandings of these terms than I was, and you were thinking about them in a descriptive sense, and I was thinking about them in a proscriptive sense, which is something that we can sort of look for as a policy. And I think in this situation, we've reversed that a bit. When I'm talking about evil, I'm talking about this as an adjective. It is a description that can be applied to a behavior that
Sure.
that we can. It does not necessarily mean that person is evil, but that action itself can. I mean, it's to some extent a
But
subjective
don't you think the
determination.
word evil
But
is ambiguous? That's what I'm striving for. I'm not saying that we can't use the term, but I'm saying I think a word like harmful or hurtful is a much more precise term. It may not be perfect, but I think it's much more. I think it's a much clearer term than the term evil, because we all have different opinions about what is evil and what is not, and that's why I pointed out that anytime, whether we're Christians or Muslims or atheists or whatever, anytime we do something that's perceived by somebody else as evil, we feel justified or possibly even good about it. It is our viewpoint of the world, and it fits. Otherwise, we wouldn't have made that decision. And so I'm not saying that evil is not a valid term, but I'm saying it leans much more to the opinion than the word hurtful, because something that I think is good, I still may not be able to argue that it didn't hurt somebody else.
and I would agree that it's a very ambiguous term, but I think it's selected, and this is obviously it's meant to be both an emotional appeal, but this is uh, well after Aristotle's rhetoric was written. So I mean, there's certainly the pathos, the logos, and the ethos to consider, and he's in this situation, I think, by using the term evil or whatever the Greek equivalent would be. I don't know. I believe it was written in Greek initially, but that's the other thing, is this is translated, so I don't know what
Yeah.
the actual term he had used. But the reason that I think the term evil is appropriate in this one is because it conveys an understanding to most people, and it helps with the emotional side of the argument to get us to understand that it's not just harm, but it's extreme harm. It's something very bad.
But you are presuming to draw a sharp line in a shade of gray.
I am, and admittedly so. That I said it. It's very difficult to draw where that line might be. I forget who the I think it was a senator said this about pornography when there were some obscenity hearings, and he said, I may not be able to define pornography, but I know what it is when I see it. That is very similar, I think, to that same argument can be applied to evil. There's some actions that I will say are universally
Okay.
evil.
There are things that we all, or 99% of us, consider to be pornography. But there are also things that 50% of us consider to be pornography. Okay, so what my point is that your definition of evil leaves the issue to opinion.
That's a fair point, but my counterpoint to that is as long as everybody has an understanding of something as evil, that evil does exist as a descriptive term. It's
So
a
whatever
valid
we all
descriptive
vote
term.
on,
As long as there's at least one thing that we could all agree on as something that is evil, then that thing could certainly be used to measure this.
There are
if
plenty
it's,
of
raping and murdering an infant.
There are plenty of
imagine.
Aryan supremacists who would think that that Hitler Holocaust was super duper.
You're right, but I cannot imagine. I mean, anybody who is not mentally ill or is not somebody who would like to perpetrate this act themselves.
There are plenty of people who are considered rational by many who would argue that the 9/11 plane crashes were kind of we kind of had it coming.
I'm not going to argue those ones, but here's one: raping and killing an infant.
Well, the Old Testament is in favor of a lot of infant killing. I'm not sure about the raping though. But
that's why it's both, or raping an infant to death.
It's got to be both raping and killing.
There was a man in Michigan just last year who raped an infant to death. That, I think, is an act that we, as any human out there who has any sort of empathy whatsoever, will agree that that is an inherently evil action.
Well, I could not disagree that it is. I would not say that it was not evil. I would say it's very evil. And I agree that there are extremes that we all agree on. And you are arguing now that it is only the extremes that are evil.
Well, I'm arguing that regardless of how extreme we have to go
even
with
killing
this,
even killing a baby, we're going to put on the debatable side.
Well, no, I'm saying I consider that to be a very evil.
So do
action.
I. But there are lots of people who don't.
What we're talking about here is the ambiguity in the language, and if there's somebody who would disagree with that one, then obviously that particular example would not be something that they would find compelling about this argument. But if there is anything that they find to be evil, then they could certainly say that's evil. And there's also the other side of this would, of course, have to be considering the morality of the God. If there's something that is considered explicitly and stated in the scriptures of that God to be something that he finds to be evil, we can also very certainly apply that as a universal in this argument.
Okay, but if we take this statement and apply it to what most atheists mean these days, then the God of the Bible could exist, because what most of us believe, what most of us regard as evil, he does a lot of in the Bible.
That's a very fair point.
Okay, but I'm, and so the argument is it becomes useless. So I think that we have to assume that we're arguing against the existence of any God, and the most difficult God to argue against in that argument is a God who is all loving and all good. And in my opinion, in order to even talk about this, you have to begin to define good and evil in terms of benefit and harm. And you have to say, this is really evil, and you have to say, this is a little evil. Because if I get in your boat and I say and I say, okay, well, it's ambiguous, but there are, maybe 5 things that we all think are super duper evil, and the rest we'll just leave in the debatable pool. Then we're saying that God should only prevent things that are as bad as raping and killing a baby.
That's not. I actually disagree strongly with that. I think that by narrowing down, a handful of things that we can all agree on, yeah, these things are evil, then it brings a lot of relevancy to the argument. Now, of course, that doesn't say that those are the only things, but we can say that at minimum, very, very least, God should be preventing these things. If this God actually is capable and actually is loving, and these acts actually are evil, then, and I mean, then the conclusion that he is malevolent comes, of course, from the fact that he doesn't consider that evil. I would say is the logical extension is if he's not capable, or if he's capable of stopping it and chooses not to, that means that either he does not choose, or he does not see that action as evil and worthy of stopping, or he simply is not concerned with it enough to stop it. In which case, the apathy is tantamount to malevolence in that regard as well.
So, you're arguing that God should at least stop some evil, but I don't think that that's what is being argued there.
I think that is essentially.
It's not saying if God is willing but not able to stop just one. I think it's arguing willing but not able to stop all.
It says
because if it's just
to
one,
prevent evil but not able.
If it's just one, you can't prove that some God like this didn't prevent I don't even want to say the thing about the baby anymore, but we'll just call it the baby thing.
I'm going to disagree with that because it's the same concept that science uses, in that a single example of something that contradicts the theory as it stands is enough to overturn the entire theory. A single counterexample is enough to reject it. Now,
okay, that's fine, but we're not talking about proving that God can't prevent all evil anymore. We're talking about proving that God can't prevent some evil. So by definition,
no, this statement here is proving that God is malevolent.
No. You said if we can find one example that contradicts the statement, then we're done. But you have changed the statement into God should at least prevent some evil. So by that definition, any example that you find is just outside of that category of the sum.
I think that to make it more clear, it has to be restated to some extent into a bit more syllogistic form. And if we take just this one clause again, is he able but not willing, then he is malevolent. I mean, that is if this and that, then this. I don't know exactly. I'm terrible.
But there is an unstated in that statement. If he is able and not willing to do what?
To prevent evil.
What? All evil or some evil?
It just says, is God willing to prevent evil but not able?
But you are arguing
so this would be the
some.
continuation of the next one. So saying, well, no, I'm saying that if God is able, if he is able to prevent evil, and there is a single action of something that we can universally say is evil, that is proof positive that he is able, or if again he's able, that he's not willing to stop it in every case.
And
there's at least some cases where he's willing to allow it to happen, even though he's able to stop it.
But now we're arguing two different things, because I was trying to argue that just because God won't prevent all evil, and what I mean is that he is unwilling to prevent any evil. That's what I mean by that. I'm interpreting the statement as God is unwilling. He is able, but he is unwilling to prevent even one act of evil. And
I
you
don't
are
think that
interpreting the
that's a
statement.
fair interpretation of that statement. I think that it goes the opposite way. This is evil exists. Is sort of if we took the entire statement, the entire trilemma that we have here, and preface it with just the statement, evil exists.
Okay.
And then we go on to say, is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's not omnipotent. Um, so this is, I think, very
So
obviously,
evil as a
it
whole.
follows the statement that there are things that happen that are evil, and
Right.
that we can agree. As long as we can agree that evil exists, then
Let's take the argument to its completion. God
Okay.
does not exist because evil exists, right?
Or well, this one, if again, if we go take it to the entire
Now his
thing,
intent is to disprove God. Period.
I think his intent is to break down a series of beliefs about God,
Which
that specifically that he's all powerful, all loving.
Yeah, he's creating a framework
and
that
he's
that, that
worthy of being
excludes the
God.
possibility of some God. That's the ultimate conclusion to this argument. Clearly, God does not
Right.
exist because evil exists. That is
Right.
that is his
that
intention.
God does not exist.
That
Not-
God.
he's not
Exactly.
saying that it's not
That
possible
God.
for any God, but yes,
That God. So
that God
that's
does
the
not
ultimate conclusion.
exist.
If that is the ultimate conclusion, then it follows that if this God did exist, evil would not exist.
That's correct. Yes.
So we are then we are therefore talking about all evil and not some.
Yeah, well, I think that a single instance, yes, all evil, because a
All
single instance of evil, of something that can universally be
Exactly
recognized
correct.
as evil.
So I
is
am
the-
arguing the correct argument, and that is that if God is able to prevent all evil, but not willing to prevent all evil, then he is malevolent.
Yes, that would be what the logical, or that would be a consistent way to reword this.
Okay, so we are not disproving God by showing that there's one act of evil that he didn't prevent. We are disproving him by showing that even one act of evil exists.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm saying that therefore we are laying all evil on the table. We're not laying the extremes. We are laying all evil.
Well,
However,
the reason, though, that I said that we need to consider the extremes is because we can all recognize that those things are evil, and they're
okay,
so even
but
if
without
a single
considering
one
but
wasn't
without
there.
considering the entire shade of gray, throwing the extremes out on the table is like playing the Hitler card.
It is. You're very right.
You cannot
but-
understand. You cannot understand the Hitler arguments. It is always the cheapest move when somebody throws down the Hitler card and pretends like that's the whole picture. And I'm saying you have to consider not just the example of Hitler, but all of the other examples that were brought up for which Hitler is trying to contradict. Okay? Anytime Hitler is brought up, it's an extreme to try to disapprove some argument, and the person who's bringing it up generally ignores everything else that's been said.
Well, I think, though, that you're looking at this from an angle that I'm having trouble grasping. Specifically, I think we can say that if God was able to prevent all evil, then we need to be able to strictly define what evil is, or at least be able to recognize what God considers evil to be, and see if we agree with that
We are talking
interpretation, because that's, I think, what malevolence means.
in that line. We are talking about a God who is able to prevent all evil, but not willing to prevent all evil. So, in this one particular line, his ability is completely out of the picture. There's nothing that you and I should argue about that concerning this line, because the line assumes that he's able. We're only talking about his intention and his will.
Right, and that's why I think any example, the more extreme, actually, the better the example becomes in this situation, is because if God was able to prevent any evil, you'd think that God would at least prevent that. Or if God was able to prevent all evil,
Yes.
then
but-
this evil, this one, should not have happened. There might be
Okay.
something that we're not fully understanding, and it might not have been as evil as we thought, or thing.
But
I mean, there's shades of gray that we may disagree with God on that one.
I think you
But
just
if
used
we
the
can
word
universally
able again. I
recognize,
think you just used the word able again. I think you said you would think that if God was able to prevent evil, that he would at least prevent this one. For which I
yes.
must once again emphasize that we are not talking about his ability. We are talking about
Well,
his
that's
willingness.
been granted, which is why
Then why keep using the term?
I'm
You keep saying able. I think
yes.
if we
I'm
rewound
saying
the
that
tape,
if God was able, that's the granted,
but that's not okay.
right?
Yeah.
This one. So we're assuming God is able to do this. So
Yes.
then, why would he not prevent the Holocaust? Why would he not
Okay.
prevent the
But
infant?
my argument is not that he's preventing some evil and not others. My argument is that he's not preventing any. And it doesn't mean
Okay.
it doesn't mean he's malevolent.
Hey, I'm more than happy to grant that he's not preventing any evil.
Okay.
And that's where I think I was going with the
All right.
extremes, is saying that this is an example that we can say that this certainly is evil. Therefore, the evil is not all being prevented. But yeah, if you want to grant that he's
Okay.
not preventing any evil, that's certainly my position as an atheist.
All right. Thank you. All right. So that was difficult. And now I think where I want to be, which is you understand that I am arguing that God is not willing to prevent any evil, and now, if I'm going to argue that, first of all, it's going to be extremely difficult, but second of all, you have to put all evil on the table, not just the extremes.
Well, I will grant that yes, that is accurate, but all evil would still be a categorical understanding, and there's something that I can say yes, all evil
And I think
is on the table,
we must
and we need to
define it.
recognize
We
sort of
must
where
define
evil is.
evil as that. At the very least, we must define evil as those actions we do intentionally that harm others, whether it be you hitting your brother or Hitler killing the Jewish people.
See, I think that one, degree is important, and two, the simple fact that something harms, I don't think necessarily makes it evil, even if it's intention.
Well,
And
I will
even
tell
if
you
something
this.
doesn't harm, it can still be evil. As we said, swinging a sword at somebody. I mean, you said that would be bad and not evil. But actually, as I thought about it,
The people who
no, it's
defined the God you're talking about, or the people that defined the God that you argue against most, whether it be the God of Old and New Testament or just the God of New Testament, almost all of those people would define you hitting your brother as evil, and they would claim that their God would consider that evil.
I would find
Agreed.
that hard to believe,
No,
given
come on.
some of the other.
You were completely
Things
depraved
that
until you
condone.
until you had Hosper the friendly ghost come inside of you.
That's true, but the Bible certainly does condone corrective corporal punishment.
Yes, but it's still
So,
evil. Acts outside of faith and the Holy Spirit are
but is that
evil.
not? Is it not potentially faith with the Holy Spirit? I guess not hitting my brother, but in that case, hitting my child could be considered an action, as long as I believe it to be corrective and inspired by the
Okay.
Holy Spirit.
Okay,
So-
corporeal punishment. Okay, fine. You want to define anything as corporeal? If you want to play that card at any point in this argument, you feel free to do so. Okay, and I will say, and we'll exclude those acts as not being evil. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
But I'm really going to go beyond. Harm is a term that implies I it's difficult because ethics itself is a very, very complicated philosophy, and when we look at things like
Right.
just only harm is what determines something is
Okay.
bad or not, that doesn't. I mean, it's technically harmful
We're
to
out of time.
spank somebody
I
during
agree.
intercourse. So that
Go
it's
on.
a difficult one to argue that just harm. I think that there has to be the best way to define evil would be that which is harmful and has no conceivable benefit.
Okay. All right. We're out of time. But you can play the corporeal punishment. Is that even the right word? Any corporal punishment card anytime you want to, and we'll throw the act out as not evil. So before we go, the first example, we're going to discern a few things. I'm going to throw a few examples out, and you're going to say, well, corporal or not. Hitler slaughtering millions of Jews, corporal or not?
Not.
Okay, I would argue completely corporal. We'll talk about this next week. Until then, Greg has made me extremely angry, but I'll be okay. See you next week.
I did want to, just before we close the show here, because I obviously we're going to come back to this next week. I wanted to say that I would like to consider next week my definition of evil as well, is as that which is harmful and there is no conceivable benefit, that which is exclusively harmful.
All right, Greg is going to dig his hole next week. Until then, stay tuned.